Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I'm your host, the American Haunt Historian, Alan Searcy. Today's episode is brought to you by Pickled Treats and Antiques in Gallatin, Tennessee. Pickled Treats isn't just one of the most popular antique stores in Middle Tennessee, it's also one of the most haunted. If you're an investigator looking for a new place to investigate, contact Shauna on the Pickled Treats and Antiques Facebook page. She has very reasonable rates, and she'll rent you her entire shop so you can do a little bit of ghost hunting. So in the last episode, I told you about Barrow Hill in West Nashville. It's long since been torn down and built over, but I always enjoy revisiting old sites that have an incredible history with some weird ghost stories. Today, we're going to stick around Nashville and talk about the Nashville City Cemetery. With no official place in Nashville to bury the dead in the early 19th century, citizens began burying their loved ones on the ground of the public square in front of the courthouse. That was a big no-no, especially to the leaders in Nashville. Yet as the town's population started to grow, so did the need for a large public burying ground. Understanding they had a problem on their hands, city leaders purchased 4 acres just south of downtown Nashville from Richard Cross in 1820. The Nashville City Cemetery was established on the site on January 1st, 1822. Sadly, in the cemetery's first few years, roughly 80% of the burials were children. Medical personnel had very little knowledge of cholera, tuberculosis, smallpox, yellow fever, and the infant mortality rate hovered around 50% until the dawn of the 20th century. But it wasn't just children who were affected by the outbreaks. Former United States President James K. Polk died from cholera in 1849. Originally, he was to be buried at the Capitol, but because Polk died suddenly of cholera, city officials couldn't take the chance that his body could still spread the bacteria. Instead, the commander-in-chief's remains were interred at the city cemetery on the outskirts of town, but not for long. Polk was moved a year later to his home at Polk Place in downtown Nashville. After the death of his wife Sarah, the couple was interred on the grounds of the Capitol. While the cholera outbreaks are typically good for business, a deadly diphtheria epidemic in 1878 all but shut down the cemetery. After a number of Nashvillians died, word began to spread around town that the vault in the city cemetery was feeling the epidemic. At that time, it was believed that cadavers in the vault were giving off poisonous gases. In theory, the gas would leak out of the vault and spread to those who lived and worked in the area. The city council declared the Nashville City Cemetery a nuisance and voted to not only close it, but had the vault burned. Going forward, only those who had purchased plots or descendants of those buried in the cemetery could be buried there legally. Everyone buried in the city cemetery is buried east to west. The bodies interred were placed facing to the east, so on the day of the resurrection, the bodies will rise with the sunset to meet their maker. Although there are rarely ever new burials in the city cemetery, you can still visit the historic public burying ground on the corner of 4th Avenue South and Oak Street. It's open from dawn to dusk every day. From early settlers like James and Charles Robertson to 21 former mayors, you'll find a who's who of Nashville's early days there. In the 1860s, it wasn't an unusual occurrence to see pigs, cows, and other farm animals roaming around the city cemetery. However, on March 23, 1868, 2 young ladies just passing through the burying ground came face to face with a 2,000-pound bull that had wandered off from a nearby farm. Not knowing exactly what to do in the situation, one of the debutantes did exactly what you shouldn't. She began waving her umbrella around in hopes it would shoo away the massive animal. To the ladies' surprise, her efforts not only angered the bull, it began charging them. When the gargantuan creature was within striking distance, the delicate dame began hitting the beast. Surprisingly, the bull stopped and stood there for a moment as the lady kept smashing the animal over its head. As soon as the bewildered bull paused to figure out what to do, a young farmhand who just happened to be walking down the street ran over and ushered the bull out of the cemetery. So all my life, I've heard stories about tunnels and caves that supposedly run underneath Nashville. In some of the books, I've talked about underground passages in Franklin and Gallatin, Tennessee. So while researching Southern Ghost Stories Murfreesboro Spirits of Stones River, I actually got permission to go into a portion of the tunnels that run underneath the town square. So the tunnels are real, and they were used by people in the 19th century, especially in Middle Tennessee. So according to legend, there are multiple tunnels underneath the Nashville City Cemetery. Supposedly, the entire cemetery is built on top of a large cave that has supposedly caved in on a few occasions. Fueling the speculation of the tunnels and caves, there's a small stream that formed when it rained. Each time it stormed, the water always disappeared into an opening on the south side of the burying ground. When the Federal Army began their occupation of Nashville in 1862, a former slave named Bob volunteered to help bury the Union dead in the city cemetery. One afternoon, as he was digging a grave on the south side of the cemetery, he dug down a little too far, and he opened up a large sinkhole. When the soldiers came looking for Bob, he was at the bottom with a broken neck. The Federals managed to rescue Bob, but sadly, his injuries proved to be fatal. The emancipated gravedigger passed away a few days later. After Bob's death, Union officers were faced with a decision: where to bury the former slave. Typically, someone from a lower class, such as Bob, would be buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. But ironically, the Union brass decided it was more fitting to throw his remains into the 10-foot deep sinkhole he had helped create. Later that day, soldiers dragged Bob's lifeless body to the sinkhole, threw it in, and placed some boards over it. As a joke, one of the soldiers wrote Bob's hole on one of the boards to mark the old slave's final resting place. But it seems old Bob and Mother Nature didn't think the joke was that funny. A few days later, a terrible storm hit Nashville, and Bob's hole flooded. Soldiers camping nearby were shocked to see Bob and the partially decomposed remains of 29 other Federal soldiers floating down a pathway out of the graveyard. When it finally stopped raining, a group of soldiers were sent out to retrieve the bodies, but they returned empty-handed. Word started to spread around Nashville about the sinkhole in the city cemetery, and people began to notice that some of the grave markers were slanted and starting to sink into the ground. Rumors began circulating that the Confederate Army was using the cave under the cemetery to move troops around Nashville. Erring on the side of caution, Federal officers placed guards around Bob's hole and other vulnerable points in the burying ground. While Bob's hole may have been the most infamous part of the Nashville City Cemetery during the Civil War, the McNary Vault became part of Nashville folklore during Reconstruction. Judge John McNary was a key figure in Nashville's early history. As a judge on the Superior Court of Davidson County and the Superior Court of Tennessee, John McNary was a very influential man, and he ran in circles with a who's who of Tennessee's upper crust. As a young man, John studied law in North Carolina with an up-and-coming attorney named Andrew Jackson. Maybe you've heard of him. In fact, Jackson actually lived with the McNary family for several months. After being elected to the Superior Court of Davidson County by the North Carolina General Assembly, Judge McNary gave his old friend one of his early breaks when he brought him to Nashville and named him District Attorney of the Western District of North Carolina. When John passed away in 1873, he was interred in the family vault in the city cemetery. After he was buried, word began to spread around town that Judge McNary had been buried with his fortune, causing people to break into his vault. As people were trying to get into the McNary vault, that all stopped when word started spreading that the tomb was actually haunted. According to sextons and gravediggers, white shadowy figures were spotted rising up out of the tomb after the sun went down. It's been speculated that the supposed caves underneath the city cemetery link up with an escape tunnel that was dug by Federal soldiers at nearby Fort Negley. It's been speculated that the white figures coming out of the McNary vault were actually Ku Klux Klan members who used a tunnel to get into the cave, then climbing out of the vault. But the white figures coming out of the ground isn't the only ghost story tied to the McNary vault. In August 1897, a teenage girl went to the cemetery and was passing the time sitting on the McNary vault reading a book. Suddenly, she was jolted from her seat by a loud noise coming from inside the vault. The frightened young lady took off running and went straight home. Nonetheless, a short time later, the brave young woman ventured back to the vault to relax and finish her book. Almost as soon as she sat down, she heard the strange noise once again. Over the next few days, the teenage girl brought some of her friends. Not only did the girls hear noises coming from the vault, they also began to hear a very faint voice. One of the braver girls got enough courage to ask, "Who are you?" Well, the teenage girl's courage was tested when she began to hear loud chains rattling, followed by a voice that said, "Go away, go away." So needless to say, the young ladies heeded the advice and ran straight home. Naturally, one of the girls told her father about she and her friends and what had happened at the cemetery. The dad dismissed the ghost story and advised his daughter to stay out of the city cemetery. But like most teenage girls, the young lady didn't obey her father. The original group of girls got back together and went back to the McNary vault. This time, they didn't hear a voice. Instead, it was a loud moaning and painful groaning sound. Once again, one of the girls asked, "Who are you?" To their surprise, the spirit replied that she was a Spanish woman who had come to America as a stowaway on one of Christopher Columbus's ships in the 18th century. The girl attempted to ask more questions, but the entity stopped speaking and started sobbing. The following day, the girls invited 12 of her friends down back into the cemetery to speak to the ghost in the vault. When one of the girls asked, "What are you doing down there?" the alleged spirit replied, "Come and see, come and see." One of the girls stood up and told the ghost she was going to take them up on their offer. As she began to walk towards the vault, they heard a loud shriek that told them, "Go away, go away." Wasting no time, all 16 girls ran out of the cemetery. So naturally, a secret amongst 16 teenage girls, it's going to get out. And it did. Within a few days, hundreds of people began filing into the cemetery in hopes of making contact with the ghost. Well, some speculated it was a homeless person, but after authorities inspected the vault, no one could figure out how anyone could get in or out. Though the tunnels were a loosely kept secret in Nashville, the city never extensively investigated to see where tunnels were under the McNary vault or any parts of the city cemetery. If there were caves under the cemetery, that was a big concern, and the ground could give away at any time and cause extensive damage to many of the grave sites and elaborate grave markers. Yet some have argued that if there were caves and tunnels running under the cemetery, they would have collapsed hundreds of years ago. So that's it for today. Don't forget to check out Pickle Treats and Antiques on Facebook. Send them a message if you want to go line up a ghost hunting investigation. So if you want to learn more about ghost stories in Nashville, check out my book, Southern Ghost Stories. I actually have 4 books about the hauntings in Nashville. Downtown Nashville, South Nashville, West Nashville. There's also Southern Ghost Stories Opryland, if you want to check that one out. We had a haunted theme park here in town. So the books are available in Kindle, and they're free to read if you have Kindle Unlimited. All my books are on there. So please like the video, subscribe to our podcast. Make sure to follow us on Facebook too. You can find me over at Twitter or X, whichever we want to call it. I'm at ATO Allen, ATOALLEN. I drop a lot of good ghost stories over there and grave robbing tales from time to time. So this weekend, I'm going to be at Smoky Mountain Terror in Kingsport, Tennessee. Make plans, come out and say hello. Looking forward to seeing everybody and sell a bunch of books. So check back next time. Got a really cool story for you coming up. It's going to be the Headless Horseman of McLean County, Tennessee. I'll see you then.